What would you say you do here?
Well, look, I already told you. I deal with the goddamn customers so the engineers don't have to. I have people skills. I am good at dealing with people. Can't you understand that? What the hell is wrong with you people?
Unbelievably, they did it again. And not a day after I reported on all the printing mishaps going on at DC Comics, you know, they had missed some colors in a trade. They left the print margins in a Lois Lane trade. They've done it again today with Tales from the Dark Multiverse, Crisis on Infinite Earths #1. They left the print margins in again. It's absolutely unbelievable. I never would have thought that I would have be covering this the day after. Now, obviously, when I talked about it before, I brought on Joe Corallo. We talked about that. He is an industry pro. He's been through the production cycle. We got his input on it. But today, now that they've done it again, inexplicably, left the margins, the printing margins, into the actual final print, I'm going to bring in a fan perspective. A man that's so cool, they call him the Breen. Eric Breen, how you doing?
Just fine, Wes, and you?
Well, I'm doing all right. I've had a lot of good news today, but this one really chaps my ass, if I'm being completely honest. Now, we know there's been a lot of changes over at DC Comics, but I find it unfathomable that they could actually be publishing comics at this level. This does not meet industry standards at all. This does not meet minimum standards, let alone exceed standards, which is something you would expect from DC and Marvel, who are basically the top of the heap as far as the comic book industry. Now, before I get into this wonderful conversation where we might see a saltier side of Eric and myself than you saw earlier today, I do want to say, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the bell for notifications. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoy this video. Give us a thumbs down if you don't. Either way, we want to hear from you guys in the comments section. What do you think about all these printing mishaps lately? Is it just operator error, or is it you know, did they release too many people? Do they just not care anymore? Definitely want to hear from you guys because we have some thoughts. I can't believe this is happening. This is the kind of stuff that the dude from World Class Bullshitters got slayed for during his stealing solo, you know, crowdfunded comic book. People were up in arms about this, and DC Comics is making these mistakes.
4 words come to mind. You had one job. Now, several months ago, when the first bloodbath happened and a bunch of editors got fired, someone made the joke that you have a bunch of interns running around doing the editing. I didn't realize one of them was Britney Spears.
Apparently, oops, she did it again. I actually had somebody. I tweeted my comments about this. I was like, DC, get your shit together. This is like, you can't be doing this. I actually had somebody come back to me like, you're being outrageous. You can still read the comic even with the lines. I'm like, this isn't your university paper. This is DC Comics. You should expect a minimum level of quality, which is a good, pristine, printed comic book. The Lois Lane Enemy of the People trade is $30. The Tales from the Dark Multiverse Crisis on Infinite Earths comic book is $6. These aren't cheap. Breen, is it unreasonable to expect that DC Comics can do their damn jobs and deliver a comic book without the damn printing margins in the final copy?
Well, first I'd say anything that distracts from the actual story in Lois Lane is probably a plus.
Wow.
But that said, no, that's there are certain things that you cannot have happened. You can't show how the meal is prepared. That's something that should never be part of the finished product. This isn't a how to make comics book. This is the finished product. And I don't care how you want to spin it. Somebody literally, all they had to do was proof the pages before it goes to print. And this doesn't happen.
It's crazy. So this is on every single page of the comic book. If you were looking at the proofs before you send it to print, you would see all of them and be like, oh shit, I need to get these red dotted lines out of here. Now, another mistake that they made recently, and I'll show this example. This was the color mistake. You can see a couple pages here. You can see this bright green color has been removed, and they printed it with white on the reprinting of the trade. I can almost, I can't accept it, but I can understand how this one happened. If you weren't familiar with the story, and maybe whoever was working on this was let go, and you had to take over at the last minute, and you weren't familiar with the pages, and you didn't know it was supposed to be green, I could see how you'd be like, I didn't even realize there was a color missing. You know what I'm saying? But with the red lines, you should know that's not supposed to be there.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with how this process works, but couldn't you have the page that you're replicating next to you and notice that that big green area is supposed to be on the other one too?
You assume that there's a library with all the DC comics there that they can go reference and be like, hey. But that would be time intensive. This trade could be upwards of like 250 pages. So I can understand when they do like those big omnibuses and like maybe there's 2 pages that they messed up. It would be hard to go through 500 pages and make sure that they are all in sequential order and there was like no duplicates. But this is forgivable, and they've done it twice.
Well, I would argue that the other one is just as unforgivable because they are asking you to pay premium prices for the finished product. And when you've got something that's just so obvious an error, that I think customers have a right to be a little salty about that. Yeah, maybe not as much as this, but neither one should be acceptable. And if that is, then what mistakes will just slide through next and just be said, well, that's the way it is now. It should not come to that.
What this feels like to me is that whoever's responsible for this, instead of doing their work, they're like getting their resume getting ready while they're being paid so they can go find a real fucking job. Because they obviously could give 2 shits about this.
Well, hopefully they put that together better than they put this together.
Well, I'm sure because they care about that. like that's the only explanation for this. It looks like they just don't give a shit.
And if they don't, how can they expect us to?
Exactly. These aren't cheap. It just flummoxes me. You're a nice guy, Brain. I'm sure you've seen lots of misprints in comic books.
Sure.
Over the years. Can you believe this happened twice in the span of a week?
Yeah, I can, because it seems like sometimes if you're having a really bad day and you tell yourself, I'm not going to make that mistake again, and you go out and make that same mistake again because you're having a bad day. That doesn't make any of it any better. But yeah, I said, I can't imagine even the people doing this, set out to intentionally screw up something back to back like that. But this should be something that's a huge wake up call, because if it does happen again, then I don't know how much this stuff is going to sell in the first place, but if this happens
Those Tales
again,
from the Dark Knight, the Dark Multiverse stories do pretty darn well, for the most part. No, now you said this should be a wake up call. Who should this be a wake up call for? Should it be a wake up call to DC Comics and their editorial staff to get their shit together, or should it be a wake up call to you and I, the readers, that maybe DC Comics isn't quite what we expect it to be, and or maybe they're not really DC Comics anymore. There's something else.
Well, when you let go as many editors as they did, you're going to have some growing pains. The problem is we're not supposed to see those. It's a lot of times they make these sweeping changes, but you never see it in the finished product. Well, now you are. And the wake up call should be to editorial, or what's left of it, to realize, hey, these, a good editor is someone you don't notice. You notice this. It's like the only team owners you know their names are the ones that make the most noise or make the most mistakes or the most bombastic. When it comes to comics, this is something you notice, and that's an in-house problem that they need to fix. As far as the fans go, I think, like I said, we are seeing that they're not what they used to be, but we are seeing signs that there's still enough of it to want to go forward. But you've got to fix, you got to clean this up, or eventually that's one more reason to not care. And they can't afford any more reasons for their fan base to not care.
Like, if I were DC Comics, if I were Daniel Cherry, if I were Jim Lee, if I were Scott Snyder, if I were Steve Orlando, who's associated with this, I think he's the writer of the book that came out this week, I would be embarrassed. And not only would I be embarrassed that it happened, I would be embarrassed that there's actually somebody out there, a fan out there, who said, you know what, you could still read the comic. It's fine. The people that are complaining are just overreacting. Like, how embarrassing is it that they expect so little of you and the professionalism out of the company that you work for and the product that you're associated with being put out, that they just said, you shouldn't have expected better. It's fucking embarrassing.
I can assure them that there's a lot more people like us than like the person you just referenced.
Yeah, but that's like people, the expectations are going down. And you don't want that as in any kind of business. You don't want people to expect less of you, especially when you're starting to charge more for the comics. This wasn't a $4 comic; it's a $6 comic. You would, I can't believe it. I wish I could get Scott Snyder or someone with DC Comics on here to come in here and explain, because I'm sure they're even more embarrassed that there are people out there apologizing, or not even apologizing, but making excuses for it, to where this could somehow be acceptable, because it's not. This is bullshit.
Yeah,
and,
that should be, thank you for trying to run interference for us, but we realize this is unacceptable. We're not going to let this happen again.
Yeah,
Someone needs to come out and say that.
To my knowledge, they haven't even addressed the issue publicly and said, hey, we've made some mistakes, we've had some turnover, but we're getting our quality control under control. And it hasn't gone absolutely down the toilet, because it appears, from my perspective, and I'm imagining you're kind of coming to the same conclusion, that maybe quality control is absolutely out the window now at DC Comics. I guess that's the kind of ship they're running, with all the turnover on the leadership and editorial staff.
Yeah, do we even know who that person would be to get out in front of this and make that statement? That person, they may not have that role defined.
Jim Lee's the publisher.
Well,
he doesn't get out in front of much unless he's, doing YouTube and drawing comic books for the most part.
Then Jim, quit making like that Batman statue you stand next to and do something.
Yeah, get a move on, man. Get out in front of this. This is embarrassing. So I'm embarrassed for him. I'm sure everyone associated with this is embarrassed. And and to the person that was like, you're overreacting, get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
This does not meet minimum standards. If someone sold me this as a crowdfunded comic book and they had to do the entire process, I would go tell them to pound sand and send me the right comic book. You can't expect this or accept this as a level of expectation, though. So I don't know. So I guess I got my rant out there. Thanks for so much for calming me down. Obviously, the calming influence on the channel. What do we call you? Old faithful here on Think can always bring some common sense to the conversation.
Be afraid.
I don't know. Hopefully, this isn't a sign for things to come. Hopefully, I'm not making another video like this next week. That's all I can say.
Let's hope.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.